I had seen solar farms before, thousands of panels stretching across open land. But nothing prepared me for what I found in the Chinese desert. The sand had almost disappeared. In its place stood millions of solar panels, covering the landscape farther than I could see. It looked less like a power plant and more like an entirely new city, with endless rows of solar panels stretching beyond the horizon until the earth and sky seemed to merge. But the size wasn't the real surprise. China wasn't simply generating electricity here. It was attempting something no nation had ever done before, transforming one of the harshest deserts on Earth into the foundation of its energy future. And that raised a question I couldn't ignore.
I'm Elias. When I arrived in northwestern China, I expected to see rows of solar panels. Instead, I found an engineering project so vast that even maps struggle to capture its true scale. The deeper I explored, the more I realized this wasn't just about renewable energy. It was about something much bigger, a vision for the future of civilization itself. When I finally reached the edge of the project, the first thing I noticed wasn't the solar panels.
It was the silence. There were no crowded cities, no factories, no neighborhoods. Just an endless desert stretching toward the horizon, interrupted by millions of dark blue panels reflecting the morning sun. The farther I walked, the larger it became. What had looked enormous from satellite images now felt almost impossible to comprehend from the ground. Every row seemed to disappear into the distance. Every section looked exactly like the last. For a moment, it didn't feel like a power station. It felt like someone had quietly built an entirely new city in the middle of nowhere. But that raised an obvious question. Why here? China has thousands of cities, millions of rooftops, and vast areas of farmland. So why invest billions of dollars in one of the harshest environments on Earth? The answer wasn't simply sunlight. It wasn't cheap land either. As I continued deeper into the desert, I realized this location had been chosen for reasons that most people never think about. And understanding those reasons would completely change the way I looked at this place.
As I walked deeper into this endless field of mirrors, the first question finally began to reveal its answer. This was not just a collection of solar panels placed randomly in the desert.
It was part of one of the most ambitious energy projects ever attempted by humanity. Hidden inside the barren landscape of China's Gobi Desert was a massive experiment, a city-sized solar power system designed to capture the sun's energy on a scale never seen before. Thousands upon thousands of reflective panels stretched across the land, each one following the movement of the sun throughout the day. Together, they created something almost impossible to imagine. A man-made sun, built on the edge of a desert. But the deeper I investigated, the more surprising the truth became. This project was not only about producing electricity.
Excellent.
China was trying to transform one of the planet's harshest environments into a source of clean energy. The desert, once considered empty and useless, was becoming a new kind of industrial landscape. Yet one question remained. Why would China invest billions of dollars building a solar city in a place where almost nobody lives?
The more I uncovered about this desert project, the more I realized this was not simply a story about solar panels.
It was a story about engineering against nature itself. For centuries, the Gobi Desert was known as a place of extremes. Powerful winds carried sand across the land, temperatures changed dramatically between day and night, water was scarce, and survival was always difficult. But instead of seeing this environment as a limitation, China saw an opportunity. This vast empty land provided something every solar project needs: endless sunlight and enormous space. Engineers began designing a completely new kind of energy landscape. They built massive fields of solar panels and connected them through complex networks capable of transferring electricity across thousands of kilometers. But creating energy was only one challenge. The real question was maintenance. How do you keep millions of solar panels working when dust and sand constantly cover their surfaces? How do you build a futuristic power system in one of the harshest places on Earth? The answer required advanced technology, automated cleaning systems, and constant monitoring. Slowly, something that once seemed impossible began to happen. A desert that had represented isolation for centuries became connected to China's growing energy network. But as I looked across the endless rows of panels, another mystery began to appear. For a moment, standing in the middle of this endless ocean of solar panels, it seemed like I had found the answer. China had built a giant solar city to replace fossil fuels and create clean energy for the future.
But the deeper I looked, the more I discovered that the solar fields were only one part of a much bigger story.
The desert was not chosen simply because it had sunlight. It was chosen because China was thinking far beyond electricity. These enormous solar farms were becoming the foundation for something much larger, a transformation of abandoned land into a new industrial ecosystem. Around these solar fields, China began experimenting with ways to make the desert useful again. Some areas introduced vegetation projects to reduce dust and restore the environment, while others explored combining solar energy with agriculture, using the shade beneath the panels to protect crops from the harsh desert climate. The goal was not just to collect sunlight.
The goal was not simply to collect sunlight. The goal was to redesign the relationship between humans and one of Earth's most difficult landscapes.
The biggest challenge was not building the solar city. China could build the panels, connect the electricity, and create the technology. The real challenge was something far harder. Could this massive energy machine survive for decades in a place where nature constantly fights back? Sandstorms, extreme temperatures, and the enormous distance from major cities created problems that no blueprint could completely solve. And this revealed the true mystery behind China's desert solar revolution. This was not just a race to create the world's largest solar farm. It was a test of whether humanity could transform the most unforgiving places on Earth into the engines of a cleaner future. But the final question remained. Was China creating the future of energy? Or was it building a dream that the desert itself might eventually challenge? As I stood at the edge of this enormous solar landscape, I realized this story was no longer only about China. It was about a question facing the entire world. How do we power the future without destroying the planet that supports us? For decades, countries depended heavily on coal, oil, and gas to fuel their growth, but the consequences became impossible to ignore. Rising temperatures, polluted cities, and increasing pressure to reduce carbon emissions forced humanity to search for new solutions. And in the middle of China's desert, a different vision was taking shape. These solar fields represented a massive shift, proving that renewable energy could be built at a scale once thought impossible. The electricity generated here helps power homes, industries, and cities far away from the desert itself. A place that once appeared lifeless is now contributing to one of the biggest energy transitions in human history. But the impact goes beyond electricity. Projects like this are changing how we see deserts around the world. For centuries, deserts were viewed as empty spaces, areas where little could be done. Now, they are being reconsidered as valuable energy landscapes. Countries across the globe are studying similar ideas, using vast areas of sunlight-rich land to create cleaner power for growing populations.
Agreed.
Yet this transformation also raises important questions. Solar energy requires huge amounts of land, materials, and infrastructure. The challenge is not only creating renewable energy, but creating it responsibly. Because the future cannot simply be about replacing one problem with another. The real achievement of China's desert solar project is not just the millions of solar panels covering the ground. It is the idea behind them, that even the most difficult places on Earth can become part of humanity's solution. The more I looked at China's desert solar city, the more I understood that this was never only about technology. It was about humanity's relationship with energy. For more than a century, economic growth depended on one thing: access to powerful sources of fuel. Coal-powered factories, oil-moved nations, gas-heated cities. These resources helped build the modern world, but they also created a challenge that future generations must solve.
China's desert solar projects represent a different path. They show a world where sunlight, something that reaches every corner of the planet every single day, could become one of humanity's greatest sources of power.
But the impact goes even further. Large renewable energy projects create new industries, new jobs, and new opportunities in regions that were once considered economically limited. Remote desert areas can become centers of innovation, connected to cities thousands of kilometers away. This is not just an energy story. It is an economic transformation. The countries that develop better renewable technologies may shape the next era of global competition. The future may not belong only to those who control oil fields or coal reserves. It may belong to those who can capture, store, and distribute clean energy most effectively. As the sun began to disappear behind the endless rows of solar panels, I looked back at the landscape I had spent days exploring. At first, this place seemed impossible to understand. A desert. A place of silence. A land where almost nothing appeared to survive. But hidden beneath that emptiness was a different story. A story of ambition, technology, and humanity's desire to build something beyond the limits of nature.
China's desert solar city showed me that the future may not always come from crowded cities or familiar places. Sometimes, it begins in the places we once ignored.
As I watched the final rays of sunlight disappear across the panels, one question remained in my mind. Can we continue building a cleaner future without creating new challenges along the way? Because the greatest achievement may not be covering deserts with technology. It may be learning how to work with the planet instead of against it. And perhaps, that is the real energy humanity has been searching for all along.